Everyone was smiling that afternoon. Cameras were out, flashes going off every few seconds. People were clinking glasses, laughing loudly, acting like nothing in the world could touch this moment. It was one of those weddings where everything looked perfect on the surface. Perfect weather, perfect music, perfect smiles, and then his wife leaned toward me. She didn't raise her voice or make a scene. She didn't even look angry. She spoke softly, almost politely, like she wanted only me to hear her. The kind of quiet that feels intentional, controlled, dangerous. The moment her words landed, my stomach dropped so fast I felt dizzy. I glanced around the room without moving my head. My ex-husband was across the floor, laughing with his friends, drink in hand, completely unaware. The guests were focused on the newlyweds, not on me. No one noticed my hands tighten in my lap. No one noticed my smile stiffening. And that's when the thought hit me, clear as day. If I reacted, if I said anything at all, I'd be the problem. So I did what I'd been doing for years. I stayed quiet, I nodded, I swallowed it. I told myself it wasn't worth ruining the moment. I'd spent so long pretending things didn't hurt that my body knew the routine before my mind caught up. But this time felt different. Maybe it was because of where we were, or maybe it was because of what she said. But mostly, it was because of who was sitting just a few seats away from me. My son. Ethan had been quiet all afternoon. He barely touched his food. He didn't laugh at the jokes, he just watched. At first I thought he was bored, counting the minutes until we could leave. I was wrong. When she finished speaking, I felt that familiar urge rise up inside me. Smile, let it go. Don't make things awkward. I opened my mouth to brush it off with something polite, but I never got the chance. Because behind me, a chair scraped loudly against the floor. The music faded, conversations stalled. The room seemed to hold its breath. I turned around, and my son was standing. That moment didn't come out of nowhere. It was built on years of silence. My name is Claire, and I've lived in Alabama my entire life. The kind of place where people smile at you even when they're judging you, and where everyone knows your business before you do. I was raised to be polite, to keep things calm, to not stir trouble unless it was absolutely necessary. I married Mark when I was young, too young to understand how much people can change. Back then, I thought love meant compromise. I thought it meant letting things go. Mark used to tell people I was easygoing. What he really meant was that I didn't push back. When our son Ethan was born, I told myself things would be different. I'd speak up more. I'd be stronger. I didn't want my child growing up watching his mother shrink herself to keep everyone else comfortable. But life has a way of pulling you back into old habits. Mark and I didn't fall apart loudly. There were no dramatic blow-ups at first, just distance, late nights, short answers, phones turned face down on the table. I could feel him slipping away long before he ever admitted it. By the time Ethan was 10, the marriage was already over. We just hadn't said it out loud yet. When we finally divorced, it was quiet, civil. People told us we handled it so maturely. What they didn't see was how much I swallowed to keep it that way. I stayed quiet for Ethan. That's what I told myself. And for a while, it felt like the right choice. Until someone new entered our lives. Mark met Lauren less than a year after the divorce. I remember the first time I saw her. She was younger than me, not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. She was polished in a way I'd never been. Perfect hair, careful words, always smiling. At first she seemed friendly, almost overly so. She asked questions about Ethan, about school, about his schedule. I told myself she was just trying to help. I wanted to believe that. But then the little comments started slipping through. They were never outright insults. That's what made them hard to respond to. Things like, "Oh, he still does that," or "Interesting that you let him decide for himself." She'd tilt her head when she said it, like she was genuinely curious, not critical. Every time, I felt that small sting. And every time I ignored it. Ethan didn't. He got quieter whenever she was around. He stopped volunteering stories. He started watching her instead of engaging. Once after a dinner at their place, he asked me why she talked to me like that. I asked him what he meant. He shrugged and said, "Never mind." That should have been my warning, but I was still trying to keep the peace. Which is why, when Mark told me they were getting married, I didn't react the way people expected. When Mark called to tell me about the wedding, I felt numb more than anything else. I congratulated him. I asked the right questions. I kept my voice steady. After we hung up, I sat alone in my kitchen for a long time, staring at nothing. I didn't plan on attending. I figured it would be easier for everyone if I stayed away. Less awkward, less tension, less pretending. Then Ethan surprised me. "I want you there, Mom," he said one night, out of nowhere. I asked him why. He didn't hesitate. He said, "Because you're my family." That was the moment something shifted inside me. I realized this wasn't just Mark starting a new life. This was Ethan being asked to step into a new version of his world, whether he liked it or not. I agreed to go for him. I told myself I'd sit quietly, smile when needed, leave early. I thought I knew exactly how the day would go. What I didn't know was that the wedding wasn't the breaking point. It was the place where everything I'd been holding in finally had a witness. The wedding day arrived faster than I expected. I remember waking up early, even though I didn't need to. My chest felt tight before my feet even touched the floor. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, adjusting a dress that suddenly felt too plain, wondering why I cared at all. The venue was just outside town, the kind of place people choose because it looks good in photos. White chairs lined the lawn, string lights hung overhead like something out of a magazine. Everything was calm, controlled, too perfect. Ethan stayed close to me during the ceremony. He didn't say much. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes forward. When Mark and Lauren said their vows, people around us wiped their eyes. I clapped when everyone else did. I smiled when it felt expected. On the outside, I was doing fine. Inside, I felt like I was shrinking. The reception was louder. Music filled the space. People loosened up. Drinks flowed. That's when Lauren started moving through the crowd, greeting everyone like she was already used to being in charge of the room. When she came over to our table, I felt my shoulders tense before she even spoke. She leaned in close, smiling like a friend, and said something about how nice it was that we all showed up. Then her tone shifted just enough for me to notice. She started talking about Ethan, about schedules, about how things might need to change now that she and Mark were married. She said it casually, like it was already decided. Each word pressed down on me harder than the last. I could feel my pulse in my ears. My first instinct was to look at Mark, but he was across the room, laughing, unaware. I realized she chose this moment on purpose. I wanted to speak, I really did. I wanted to say something clear and firm, but that old voice in my head kicked in, louder than my own. Don't ruin the day, don't make it awkward, don't embarrass anyone, so I nodded. And that's when the weight of it all hit me. The years of staying quiet, the pattern I'd fallen into, the example I'd been setting without realizing it. I was already forming a polite response when the room changed. A chair scraped loudly behind me, sharp enough to cut through the music. That sound carried something else with it, a shift, and before I could turn around, I felt it. This wasn't just about me anymore. I turned slowly, my heart racing, and saw Ethan standing behind me. For a split second, I panicked. I wanted to tell him to sit down, to stay out of it, to let me handle it, even though I hadn't handled anything for years. But the look on his face stopped me. He wasn't angry, he was calm. Not the quiet, withdrawn calm I'd seen lately, but something firmer. Like he'd already crossed a line in his own mind and wasn't going back. People nearby started to notice. Conversations paused. A few heads turned. Lauren straightened up, her smile faltering just enough to show confusion. Ethan looked directly at her and said, "You can't talk to my mom like that." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. The kind of voice that makes people listen, because it isn't trying to impress anyone. Lauren laughed nervously and said something about misunderstanding. She glanced around, suddenly aware of the attention. That's when Mark finally noticed what was happening. He called Ethan's name, sharp and warning, telling him to sit down. But Ethan didn't move. He didn't even look at his father. "She's raised me my whole life," Ethan said, his voice steady. "She doesn't need to be replaced or managed." My chest felt tight. I wanted to disappear and stand taller at the same time. People were fully watching now. No one was pretending anymore. This wasn't a private moment. It was out in the open, and there was no taking it back. Then Ethan turned to me. His expression softened just a little. He held out his hand and said, "Mom, let's go." And in that moment, standing there with everyone watching, I realized the real turning point wasn't his words. It was the choice I was about to make. For a moment, I didn't move. I could feel every eye in the room on us. The music had faded into something distant, like it belonged to another place. All I could hear was my own heartbeat and the sound of my breath catching in my chest. Mark stepped closer, his face tight with embarrassment more than concern. He told Ethan this wasn't the time or place. He said we could talk later. He said a lot of things people say when they want a moment to disappear. Ethan didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, waiting. That's when I realized something that hurt and healed at the same time. My son wasn't reacting out of anger. He was responding to something he'd been watching for a long time. The comments, the tone, the way I shrank to avoid conflict. Lauren tried to recover. She said she didn't mean anything by what she'd said, that she was just thinking out loud. But her words sounded thin now, stripped of the privacy she'd used as cover. I looked at Ethan's hand, still held out to me, and for the first time in years, I didn't think about how it would look if I stood up. I didn't think about whispers or judgment or keeping things smooth. I thought about what it would feel like to choose myself. I stood. The room felt different when I did, like something had shifted under everyone's feet. I took Ethan's hand, and in that small, simple gesture, I felt years of silence loosen their grip. We didn't argue on the way out. We didn't explain. We just walked together, past the tables, past the lights, past the perfect decorations meant to frame a happy ending that wasn't ours. Behind us, the music started again. Laughter followed. The wedding continued, but something important had already ended. The drive home was quiet, not uncomfortable, just heavy in the way moments feel when you know they'll stay with you forever. The road stretched out in front of us, dark and familiar. About halfway home, I started crying. Not loud, just enough that my shoulders shook. I apologized without thinking. I said I was sorry he had to see that. Sorry it got messy. Sorry I hadn't handled it better. Ethan kept his eyes on the road and said something I'll never forget. You didn't do anything wrong, he said. You just stayed quiet for too long. That sentence settled into me slowly. I realized how much he'd noticed over the years. How much he'd learned not from what I said, but from what I tolerated. The next day, Mark called. He was angry. He said Ethan embarrassed them. He said I should have stopped it. I listened without interrupting, and for once I didn't feel the need to explain myself. Ethan chose to stay with me after that, not out of anger, not as a punishment, just because he knew where he felt steady. And here's the truth I didn't expect to learn. I thought staying quiet made me strong. I thought swallowing things made life easier for everyone else. But strength isn't silence. And love doesn't ask you to disappear. I never taught my son how to stand up for me. I taught him kindness, respect, and what it looks like to keep showing up, even when it's hard. Somehow, that was enough. If you've ever stayed quiet just to keep the peace, you're not alone. And if someone has ever spoken up for you when you couldn't, hold on to that. Sometimes the bravest voice in the room is the one that is learned by watching you. If you enjoy the video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this.